EPICCROSSOVER has been making custom tracks since early 2023 and he's been pumping out these tracks like crazy. By now he has already reached over 60 different custom tracks. Now with this amount of tracks, it's obviously no surprise that some tracks are bound to be better than others. And today I'm going to rank every single track by EPICCROSSOVER from worst to best. This ranking will include the newest version of every track that's on the custom Mario Kart wiki that was either created, co-created or commissioned by EPICCROSSOVER. As always, each track will get a rating between 0 and 10, 0 being the worst and 10 being the best, so that you can see how much I actually like each track. Now before I kick off this ranking, I want to thank you guys for 450 subscribers. I'm not really sure how we reached this since I didn't really upload much long form content recently, but I'll take it of course. And remember, at 500 subs we're doing a Q&A, so be sure to post some questions in the comments down below or in my Discord server. And with all of this out of the way, let's start off the ranking. 62, S2 Port Mackerel. This is one of EPICCROSSOVER's oldest tracks and it's a port of a Splatoon 2 arena. While the track's concept isn't terrible, unfortunately there's no real track design here and no indications on where you need to go. This also makes it very easy to miss key checkpoints and get no lap counts. It's still kind of interesting, but it's just very poorly functioning, so that's why it places in last. 61, Fred's Evil Circle. I don't think it's a massive surprise that an April Fool's track ends up so low. As the name suggests, the track is literally just a circle, which is not that bad at first, until you realize that the track is 8 laps and well over 6 minutes long. Yeah, these super long tracks are honestly just really painful to play, so we will see a lot of them near the bottom of the list. 60, Wolf's Questionable Dungeon. Here we have another joke track. All you do on this track is drive straight until you get to the finish line. Oh, and of course there's also a negative speed mod to make the track feel even longer. Thankfully the track is only a little bit more than 2 minutes, but that's still not really that good. 59, Curly Q Close. This is another really long track taking over 4 minutes to complete. The only thing saving it is that the track design is technically more interesting than the previous 2 tracks. But like the previous tracks, there's just no replayability here. 58, Extensive Train. This was made for the Quack CT competition and yeah, it also falls under the category of really long tracks. But despite taking over 2 minutes to complete, this track actually gets saved by its more interesting visuals. It is definitely one of the more interesting long tracks. 57, Monochrome Malpractice. Thankfully, this is our last straightaway track. While it doesn't look as interesting as Extensive Train, it gets saved by the track being quite a bit shorter. And I guess there's 2 ramps, so that's kinda interesting? Not really. Well, at the very least, we can now move on to actual track designs. 56, Black Ice Freeze. This is our first co-op track here, and the co-op partner for this track was actually me. Okay, it's not that important, I only made the minimap. Anyways, it was also created for the first EXTR competition where it placed last. So the good news is, since this is a remake of Burning Freezeway, this track has an actual track design. The bad news is that you can't really see anything. So the only 2 ways to beat this track is to either follow the CPUs, so good luck when you're playing online I guess, or you can hope to get a bullet bill from the only item box that's right at the starting line. I guess if you're a big nerd, you can also just memorize the whole Burning Freezeway track design. My point is, invisible tracks are not really that functional. 55, Black Ice Freeze 2, The Overly Grown Past of Irrational Decisions. Yeah, this is another invisible track, and once again I made the minimap for it. This was made for the second EXTR competition, where unsurprisingly it once again placed last. Who would have thought that invisible tracks wouldn't do well at competitions? I do prefer this over the original Black Ice Freeze though, since I feel like the Zinc Coastline track design is a bit more interesting, and the track is wider at some sections, making it easier. Also, there's 2 item boxes I guess instead of 1. 54, MSS Yoshi Park. This is a port of a stadium from Mario Super Sluggers. Thankfully, unlike Port Mackerel, there's actually a somewhat clear track design here. It's still quite buggy and unpleasant visually, but it has something. 53, Nightfall Avenue. It's unfortunate that I have to place this track so low, because it actually feels like an attempt for a genuine racetrack, but unfortunately it has a previously mentioned length problem. The longest straightaway on the track takes almost a full minute to drive through. This is a lot better than the previous track since it actually has a pretty solid track design. It is definitely a major step up from the previous tracks. 52, Ebony Extend. Aside this being a joke track, this is quite similar to Nightfall Avenue in a lot of ways. While I prefer the visuals on Nightfall Avenue, this track gets the edge by having a more interesting track design and being a bit shorter. This is easily one of the better joke tracks here. 51, Rhyme Fusillade Byways. So first of all, this track has literal seizure warnings, so it's not hard to imagine that it doesn't really look great visually. The track design is okay, the split pathway concept is kinda interesting, but the track does feel a bit underscared at parts. But yeah, this track is just not very nice to look at. 50, MP4 Bowser's Bigger Blast. Similar to Port Mackerel and Yoshi Park, this is another port, this time from Mario Party 4. It's a lot smaller than the other 2 mentioned tracks, which also makes it quite a bit easier to play. The track is pretty much just a square though, so it doesn't really go any higher from here. 49, Bissell's Circuit of Darkness. This track was made for the first edition of the Quack CT competition series, where it placed second. While the visuals here are a lot nicer than on some previous tracks, the track design is not that interesting to be honest. Aside the last few turns, this track is pretty much just another glorified square, and it doesn't really have any anything going on. I would say though that this is the first track that I don't really have an issue playing. 48, codename Wario Box. No, I'm still not placing tracks high because they're based on Wario, get over it. Anyways, this was made for the Wario CT Jam, which by the way was the 69th edition of the CT Jam series, where it placed 15th. It's somehow placed below my track and I have no clue how. Not that this is a super strong track though, it's literally just a square, that's literally it. It gets the edge over Bissell's Circuit of Darkness because it's quite a bit shorter. 47, Hue Ignition. This track is quite different from the rest as it consists of a lot of cannons. It overall has a fairly good concept and visual style. However, it does sadly fall under the category of really long tracks. There's a lot of sections that feel very overscaled, but otherwise the track is totally fine. 46, Tarsa's Fallen Dreams. This track was made for the Tarsa Turbo Jam, where it placed last. For a Turbo Jam track, it's not too bad, but it's just a square with a few ramps. Obviously, it's not really the most interesting track design, but it's fine to play, I guess. 45, Lilac Foundation. This track looks interesting for sure. Its track design, however, is not really as interesting, as it's just another rectangle. There is some cool looking ramps though, I guess, so it gets the edge over the last track. 44, Burning Freezeway. This is one of the tracks that have been remade countless times because of the EXTR competitions. It was made for the Fire and Ice CT Jam, where it placed last. The track design here is fairly simplistic, but also not bad. Unfortunately, the same thing can't be said about the visuals, as they give me some Rhyme Fusilade Byways flashbacks. For being an old track though, this track is fairly good. 43, Wooden Variegation. Well, speaking of old tracks, here we have another one. Like Burning Freezeway, the track design here is quite simplistic, but it looks a lot nicer. It's a very forgettable track, but it's decently fun, I guess. 42, Bissell Circuit of Hell. This was made together with Char6432 for the second edition of Kozakura's Remake Challenge, and it's a remake of Bissell Circuit of Darkness. I definitely do prefer this over the original track, as it looks a lot nicer visually, and 3 laps suits the track way better than 5 laps. The track is still pretty empty though, so it can't place higher than this. 41, Iconic Islands. This was made for the Floating Islands CT Jam, where it placed 14th. I really like the distinct textures that were used here. The track design is once again more on the simplistic side here. It's an okay track overall. 40, Fiery, Freezy, Flamey, Frosty, Fire, Freeze, Flame, Frostway. This track was made together with myself for the first EXTR competition, where it placed 11th. Despite this being a joke track, I actually prefer it over the original Burning Freezeway, both visually and gameplay wise. It's a fairly fun track, just not really that interesting still. 39, Watcher's Trip to Albania. This was made together with myself and Watcher for the second EXTR competition, where it placed 16th. It's quite similar to the previous track, but I just find the Zinc Coastline track design more interesting, and the track is all trickable, which is kind of fun, I guess. There isn't a lot more to this though. 38, Unhinged Shade. This was made together with myself for the first EXTR competition, where it tied for 12th. Like the previous tracks, it's not bad, but just very simplistic. It does feel a bit more fleshed out overall though, and it's generally pretty alright. 37, Hello, Your Computer Has Virus. For the 4th time in a row, we have a track that I also worked on. It was also made for the 3rd LTR competition, where it placed 9th. Despite it being a joke track, it has a fairly enjoyable track design overall, but it's obviously still not really that interesting of a track, both gameplay wise or visually. Its layout is a sizable upgrade from the previous tracks though. 36, Green World Loop. This track was made together with Loop for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 17th. This is definitely one of the more interesting joke tracks. In particular, the track keeps a couple strats from the original Zinc Coastline, which I appreciate. The biggest issue with this and many other Zinc Coastline remakes though is that the second half of the track feels quite empty. Otherwise though, this track is pretty enjoyable to play. 35, Subzero Sky Sanctuary. This was made for the Arctic CT Jam, where it placed last. Honestly, this is just a really forgettable track, but don't get me wrong, it has fine gameplay and fine visuals. It just doesn't really stand out in any way, but it's a good track, I guess. 34, Brickwork Badlands. This was made for the Art CT Jam, where it placed last. Visually, I'd say this is a bit weaker than the previous tracks, but I do enjoy the gameplay a bit more. The cannon entrance can be a bit inconsistent though. Solid track otherwise. 33, Kindling Argentine Drift Waterfront. This was made for the 2nd EXTR competition, where it placed 14th. Epic Crossover made 4 different color-based remakes of Zinc Coastline for this competition, and what's unique about this one is that the track is going backwards. I do prefer the forwards design by quite a bit, and this track can also drag on. Otherwise though, this is quite good for sure. 32, Monochrome Malfunction. This is actually Epic Crossover's first custom track, and considering that, it actually works really well. The track design is quite distinct and fun. 5 laps fits the track pretty well too. Overall, this was definitely a pretty good start for Epic Crossover, I'd say. 31, Vermilion Skies. This at first may seem like a really basic and unmemorable track. That is until you realize that all of the walls on this track are drivable. This can actually make for some really cool tech. It's dumb fun, but I love dumb fun. 30, Xenoblast Boulevard. This is another one of the rather forgettable tracks. That of course doesn't mean that it's bad, because it actually has a pretty fun track design. The cannons are also used in some interesting ways, I guess. It's a good track all things considered, but not one I'm excited to play. 29, Arctic Volcano. This track was made together with Char6432 for the first EXTR competition, where it placed 9th. And I'd say this is where we're starting to get to the really solid tracks. Both the theme and the track design here are executed pretty well. My 2 biggest issues with the track are the massive turn at the end and the shortcut not working that well. Other than that, this is a great track though. though. 28, Bubblegum Heights. This track has a pretty interesting layout with a tight turn and some cool strats. My issue here though is that almost nothing on this track is trickable, which makes this track feel quite sluggish. I think this track could really benefit from getting an update, because it has a lot of potential. 27, Laurine Lake. This was made for the second EXTR competition where it placed 13th. As previously mentioned, EPICCROSSOVER made 4 color-based remakes for this competition, and this is the blue one. While it does have Koopa zappers and a really cool invisible split pathway, it also has some bugs. Particularly at the shortcut section, the water collision can sometimes mess you up. It is definitely more interesting to play though than kindling Argentine Drift Waterfront. 26, Jank Reservoir. Well, the name here isn't far from the truth, though I've seen way worse. This track actually has a really enjoyable track design for the most part. The only problematic sections are a really tight turn and a mushroom jump that seems impossible without items. It's a pretty cool track otherwise. 25, Zinc Coastline. This is the track that got remade countless times in the second EXTR competition. It overall has a fairly solid track design with some good shortcuts. Visually, it looks pretty cool too. I just wish the second half of the track was more interesting. 24, Original Woodlands. This was made together with MKWii for the first EXTR competition where it placed 8th. It's definitely one of the more forgettable Burning Freezeway remakes. However, it is quite fun to play and looks good enough visually. Maybe there could have been a few shortcuts, but otherwise this track is fine. 23, Cerise Excursion. This was made for the second EXTR competition where it tied for 11th. It's another one of the color-based Zinc Coastline remakes, this time of course being the red variant. Compared to the previous 2 color-based remakes, this one is definitely the most functional so far. The issue once again is just the second half of the track, especially the super long straightaway. Otherwise, it pretty much has everything that it should have. 22, Rockin' Chomp Raceway. This was made for the Mario Party City Jam, but it was not included in the voting. Besides a few sections feeling a bit overscaled, this is a very solid track. The track design is quite interesting and the visuals are good enough too. Really though, the only issue here once again is that some of the straightaways are a bit too long. 21, Parching Breeze. This track was made together with Char6432 for the first EXTR competition where it tied for 12th. Despite this placing lower than many other Burning Freezeway remakes, I find this one to be quite a bit more interesting. There is some neat tech here, especially at the start, and the track feels nicely scaled. The split pathway section could have been a bit more interesting though. 20, Fred Stone Catastrophe. While this may not be the most fleshed out track visually, the track design here is pretty great. Most sections here feature some pretty interesting design choices. With a slight downscale, this might honestly be one of the best tracks gameplay wise here. 19, Sparkling Pass. This track has a very strong start and ending. The gameplay at these sections is really fast paced and scaled very well, but unfortunately in the middle of the track there's 2 pretty big turns that are dragging down this track by quite a bit. The gameplay at the start and the end of the track is still strong enough to place it up here. 18, Abstruse Abscess. This was made for the 3rd LTR competition where it placed 10th. I'm surprised this track placed below Hello Your Computer Has Virus. This is overall a very well designed track and nearly every section feels interesting. The only 2 issues I can see here is the cannon entrance and the length of the track, but this is definitely where we're starting to get to the really great tracks. 17, Galactic Freeze Burn. This was made together with MKWii and King Boo Gaming for the first EXTR competition where it placed 5th. This is just a great track overall. It has a nice scale and I really like the custom alien Goombas. The visuals are pretty great and memorable too. The only issue here is that the cannon entrances feel a bit random. I feel like there could have been some indication and the cannons could have been trickable. Otherwise, this is a pretty strong track. 16, Poisonous Detour. This track was made for the 6th edition of First Come First Serve where it placed 8th. Overall, it's another very well designed track. It has a good visual style and some pretty cool looking ramps. I do think that the track's requirement of using a special item box could have been used in a more interesting way. The track could have also benefited from having a shortcut or 2. Besides that though, this track slaps for sure. 15, Yoshi's Gay Wonderland. I didn't expect too much here at first, judging by the name, but this track is actually quite good. There is a great use of split pathways and shortcuts here. The visuals can be confusing at some sections, but otherwise this is a great track. 14, Bel Bloom. This track was made for the Flowers CT Jam where it placed 9th. The track design here is so good. The whole track is scaled very nicely and there's even some cool shortcuts and strats. There is one section where the model and the collision don't match up, but otherwise the track is very much great. 13, Manic Daydream. This track was made together with Char6432 for the Split the Friend Room CT Jelly where it placed 5th. This track is absolutely bonkers and I love it. It easily has some of the most unique gameplay here. I actually really enjoy all the super steep slopes that this track has. The only reason why this isn't placed higher is because the spiral turn drags on for a bit. 12, Viridescent Esplanade. This was made for the second EXTR competition where it placed 9th. In my opinion, this is easily the strongest color-based Zinc Coastline remake. The green color fits the track's visual style pretty well and I like the trees too. I also think that out of all the color-based remakes, this has the best scaling and gameplay. It's just a pretty great track overall. 11, Verglas Volcano. This track was made together with Luke for the first EXTR competition where it placed 4th. This track has a lot going for it. The track design is very strong, the visuals look great, there's some really cool shortcuts and strats, and there is a great use of objects. So you may ask why this is not in the top 10? Well, unfortunately, I don't think the slippery road at the ice section works too well. Otherwise though, this is easily one of the more interesting tracks here for sure. 10, Leafy Loop. This was made for the second LCR competition where it placed 6th. This track is just super enjoyable. It's genuinely just a really fun track to play and it looks looks good visually too. The off-road being light off-road is very broken though. The Flame Runner literally has one of the worst off-road stats in the game, and yet you can do shroomless off-road shortcuts with ease. But that also gives this track a pretty unique playing style, which I appreciate. Definitely a great start for our top 10. 9. Psychological Aftermath. This track was made together with myself for the first EXTR competition, where it tied for 6th. By the way, the only thing I did on this track was moving a single item route by 1mm. Literally the same thing that I did on the Great Apple War. Anyways, this is another really fun track. The track looks great visually, and I especially like the way all the ramps are used. On top of that, there is also a cool shortcut, and the track is scaled very nicely. We're definitely at the tracks now that don't really have any major issues. 8. Monochrome Manish. This track was made together with MKWii for the first EXTR competition, where it tied for 6th. Yeah, I can see why this tied with Psychological Aftermath. These two tracks are extremely similar in quality. Once again, both the track design and the visuals here are very nice. The track once again uses its ramps really well and has a cool ending strat. Another very great track right here. 7. Fred City. This track was actually made by Kozakura, but it was commissioned by EPICCROSSOVER, so I'll count it because why not? As expected with Koza, this track looks really nice visually. The track design is quite simplistic, but it's really enjoyable. It's a very short and sweet kind of track. 6. Dynamic Avenue. This was made together with myself for the Electric CT Jam, where it placed 8th. I did make the track's model, so I might be a bit biased, but I think this track turned out quite well. I wouldn't say it's one of my stronger works, but I do enjoy it a fair bit. The track has some cool gameplay ideas, and overall it's just quite fun to play. 5. Galvanized Shipyard. This track was made together with Char6432 for the second EXTR competition, where it placed 10th. This track was robbed so hard, it easily deserved top 5. I really like the track's theming, and the gameplay is very strong too. The track has some really nice strats and shortcuts. I especially like the one where you drive on top of the containers. EPICCROSSOVER and Char worked really well as a collab duo. 4. Twilight Trinity. This is easily EPICCROSSOVER's best solo track in my opinion. The track has a really great visual approach, and the gameplay is amazing too. There is not much wrong about this one, just a really nice track. 3. Deserted Oasis. This was made together with Luke for the second LTR competition, where it placed 5th. And yeah, this is just an absolute banger. The gameplay here is very well put together, the visuals look really nice, and the use of objects here is amazing. The start of the underwater section is a bit blind, but otherwise this is a super awesome track. 2. Gleaming Gorge. This track is a commission by EPICCROSSOVER, and it was made together with Cats for Life. It's easy to say that visually this is by far the best track here. This genuinely looks like something that could be in CTGP. The gameplay is very strong and interesting too. The only reason why this barely misses out on first place is because the track is a bit jank at some sections, but there is no denying that this is a banger and a half. But now it is time for first place, which is gonna go to Biofrost Lab. This track was made together with Kozakura for the third LTR competition, where it placed 5th. Not only does this track look very clean visually, but it also has easily the best gameplay out of any track here. The track is quite fast paced, and every section feels really nicely put together. There is nothing I can even slightly complain about here, so this gets the almighty 10 out of 10 score. And that concludes this ranking. Are you a Splatoon player and furious for me putting the Splatoon port in last? Let me know in the comments down below. If you guys enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and a sub. Remember, Q&A at 500 subs. And yeah, I hope you guys are having a very much wonderful day, and I will see you guys in the next video, and as always, enjoy Wario on drugs.